Today's guest is Ryan Ruocco. Ruocco is the podcast host for R2C2 with CC Sabathia on the Ringer Spotify network. We talk about that podcast in detail and jumping from different media networks and seeing if it was stressful for CC and Ryan, because let's be honest, that can be a stressful situation, jumping from network to network. We also talked about Ryan's career broadcasting, yes, and ESPN, covering all of the NBA and focusing also on the Nets and the New York Yankees. We talked about Aaron Judge, MLB Lockout, and the Harden-Ben Simmons trade, and a ton more in this awesome interview with Ryan Ruocco. Let's get started right now. Today's guest is the podcast host of the R2C2 Podcast under the Ringer Network with CC Sabathia. He's also the play-by-play man for the NBA and WNBA on ESPN, and also does a little Nets and Yankees on the Yes Network. It's Ryan Ruocco. Ryan, thanks for coming on.
I appreciate you having me, man. Glad to be with you. Glad to see your Hakeem Nicks jersey standing proudly over your left shoulder there.
Yeah, I got that. Geez, I might have been like 12 or 13. You did like all those autograph signings. I got that years ago. Been a Giants fan. But I do have to say a quick shout out right in the beginning is our friend, Justin Shackil. He was the one who set this up. Shout out to Shackil. And your guys' relationship goes way back.
Yeah, man. That's one of my best friends. Shaq and I went to college together at Fordham. My radio class, if you will, at WFUV consisted of some people who were in my grade, which was graduating class of 04, and then some who were graduating class of 05. Is that right? In college, or I have that 08, sorry. 08 and 09, not 04 and 05. I'm thinking high school. 08 and 09. I graduated in 08 and Shaq graduated in 09, but I transferred to Fordham when I was a sophomore from Loyola. And Shaq transferred, I think, after one semester at Quinnipiac his freshman year.
Right.
And then our other two really super close friends there, Bobby Coyle and Lou Baracelli. They were in Shaq's grade. So Shaq came on. The three of us really connected quickly. Bobby, Lou, and I, and then Shaq joined us midway through my first year at WFUV. All of our first year at WFUV. Shaq's freshman year of college, my sophomore year of college, and we just hit it off, man. And he's the best. He's just an amazing friend, great dude. I'm glad to see him continuing to get more and more gigs because he deserves it. And he's just an amazing friend and one of my favorite people on the planet.
Yeah, Shackle's killing it now. He's got his new podcast, Towing the Sled, with Coney on John Boy Media Network, which is great. I've never actually met Shackil in person, but we were friends. We became friends on Clubhouse. I hosted this MLB show on this club, and he popped in one day, and he was our Yankee guy. And we had like a Texas Rangers guy. We had Shackil. We had a bunch of other people that covered baseball across the country. And Shackil and I became friends. And that was led to you. And I also have to talk about, you are outside doing this podcast with me right now because you have COVID right now. How is that going? And then we'll get into how dealing with COVID in your job, because I'm sure it's not fun right now.
Yeah, thankfully my symptoms were mild and resolved quickly. So if you can hear a little congestion still in me, but it's not as bad as it was, and it's not something that would make me lose sleep if I was on air with it. But otherwise, thankfully, I feel good, man. I had like a couple days where I felt a little under the weather, but I honestly, and I was vaxxed and boosted, and my symptoms were super mild, gratefully. So it's really more so just the sort of tangible aspect of being sidelined from life while you wait for, your quarantine period slash, returning negative tests, if you will, because I've been without symptoms for quite a few days, but I'm still just making sure I have negative rapid tests before I get back out in the world. And then navigating, trying to keep my wife and my 5.5-month-old daughter from getting COVID, so far, thank God, knock on wood, they've come through okay. But yeah, exactly. It's, the vaccine did its work, and gratefully I feel good. So yeah, the only thing is, like, rather than be inside spitting around my viral droplets, I take the podcast interview outside, because when I'm inside, I'm in a double KN95 situation still.
Well, you're doing the right thing, and I do appreciate you coming on, like I said before we even started, because look, not many people would with COVID. You are bedridden, you're just chilling. Last thing you want to do is get on a podcast, but I appreciate you doing that. But during this whole COVID era in your career, you're doing everything. You're doing everything. The podcast, which we'll get into, you're calling a lot of net games. You've called Yankee games, and you're doing the NBA and WNBA for ESPN. How is the normal life of being in the booth and traveling, and then going right into the COVID era of broadcasting, doing your career? How has that transition been? Has it been a struggle? And because you talked about it the other day on your podcast, you were like, it's kind of nice not going and traveling, and that is like one benefit for this whole COVID era. But how has that affected you and your professional life?
Yeah, I think it's a balance, because the job is clearly better when you're on site,
Sure, and absolutely.
And anyone who says, like, oh, we can do just as good a job not being there. No, you can't. Like, you cannot do just as good a job if you're not there. There are things you miss. There are things you can only experience there. So getting back on the road was super important to all of us this year. All of us at Yes. ESPN has remained pretty committed to that throughout. As much as they can throughout this, but certainly this year for all our NBA games and WNBA for the playoffs and ABC games, we would travel last year. And then for our women's college package, which is has a lot of like elevated production, we've been on the road. There are certainly there were benefits to not traveling as much, because it gave me more time with my wife all during her pregnancy. And more time with my infant daughter. But for the job, you got to be there, and there's an energy that comes with being there. So,
right, absolutely.
I think the most difficult part in the beginning, being back on the road, but during kind of COVID times, was so much of what makes the road feel like what it does is the camaraderie you feel with your teammates. And so for us, we're all, teams, just like, the teams recovering, we're teams, when it comes to our broadcast team.
Absolutely.
And so being able to go to dinner or grab a post-game drink or whatever, or even have a production meeting, those are really key elements of what make a team when it comes to broadcasting. So it took a little while to get back in the flow where you weren't necessarily, siloed in your room on the road. And I think that having some of that back, which I felt that with the WNBA playoffs some, and then some during the NBA, and I know I'm really going to feel it even more so after this, because I'm going to be the safest guy in the room after once I clear COVID protocols here. So I think it's important. I think there's a lot of little intricacies that you get from that experience that you can only get by bonding. So it was kind of weird being on the road, but still feeling kind of sterile, like you're in sterile situations. And it's been nice to slowly get back to kind of, integrating as a team. And even just like being on the road with the Nets, being around the team, it's so important. The stuff you get informationally and just relationship wise by being on site, it's really invaluable. So it's slowly sort of been ramping up to feeling more and more like normal, which is nice.
Yeah, it's very important when you have these production meetings, because there is a feel to getting someone's point of view on a decision how you want to call the game or the pregame show or whatever it is. And to now kind of get back into the groove of things where you are on site in Brooklyn calling the net games with, Richard Jefferson or whoever it is, the funny jokes or the conversations in person compared to doing it in your office back where you are is night and day for the viewer. Because if you say something, there's a delay, and you say you can call someone on the court wrong, and you might not know it, and then whatever, it's a pain in the ass. And I feel bad for you and many other broadcasters have to go through that. And you mentioned on one of your episodes, you were like, yeah, it was with John Boy, and you were on there talking about doing the broadcast, and you said, look, if I make a mistake when I'm not there, everyone's got to relax, calling not Carmelo Anthony, as you mentioned, or a different example. That just sucks though, for you, because you're you want to be a perfectionist. You want to do everything right. And I feel that sort of angle as a broadcaster on your side, because it's a pain in the ass. And I'm sure you had to deal with it.
Yeah. The toughest thing was, and the amazing thing was the technical crews that we have, in my experience, both at ESPN and Yes Network, they were unbelievable at giving us the highest quality show you could possibly have technologically within the constraints that we were given. But still, I called all my NBA games last season until the second round of the playoffs from my apartment, looking at a monitor with the feed coming via Zoom. It's delayed.
Crazy.
So they made the delay as small as possible. But for me, when I go back and I watch the game, I can't even really get into any of my calls because I'm seeing the ball go through the hoop and then hearing the punctuation rather than it being simultaneous. Just that split second for someone who it's, for me, play-by-play is an art. That is, that's troublesome. And it's just, you're only going to achieve that by being there. The atmosphere, the crowd. I think it was one thing when the stands were empty. It was a lot easier to do because you weren't missing anything atmosphere-wise, even though you were missing things just visually being there. But once you have fans in the stands, you really had to be there to, absorb everything going on. And there were times where, I'm looking at a monitor and it's just different than when you're seeing bodies in front of you. And, I had a Tennessee women's game on ABC in the first round of the playoffs last year in the NCAA tournament. And I kept on 2 or 3 times. I mistook one player for another because they're kind of their gait with their games was similar. And even though they didn't look alike necessarily, but when you're deciphering it off of an internet feed, it's easier to if you see kind of a similar gait in just the way they play to mix it up. And it's you don't want to do that on a, tournament game on ABC, but it's just, you did the best you can. With those situations. It happened to me sometimes too. If you had, I feel like it happened with Jokic and Isaiah Hardenstein at one point where it was they're both wearing number 5. They're both tall white dudes.
And they're going fast too.
Yeah. And it's and it happens, So, you kind of just had to accept that some things weren't going to be perfect, but you do the best you can. And, I think having genuine enthusiasm for the sport really helped because it allowed me to manufacture the energy I needed even when I was broadcasting from my apartment.
One benefit from the pandemic in my eyes is that podcasting, that world exploded. And one podcast in particular is yours with CC. I have his bobblehead, nice. the lightsaber one. It was, I think it was May the 4th be with you that day. And it was CC. Yeah. So your podcast, R2C2, went from Uninterrupted to The Ringer. Talk about the transition from one big media company to the next. Was the process a little nerve-wracking of okay, so we're going to be on pause for a few months. We're going to lose maybe some listeners, and we don't know where our next home is. Talk about that transition, and were you in CC nervous?
No, I mean, I think that we knew where we were going when things ended with Uninterrupted, so we knew where we were landing. First of all, I want to say, I loved the people at Uninterrupted. We work with some great people. Our producers who we work with locally, our board ops, our engineers. Mav Carter has always been great to me. there certainly, I think we could have had a wonderful future if we would have stayed there as well. But an opportunity came along at the Ringer, knowing the sort of audio infrastructure that existed there was really tempting. Plus, on the heels of the Spotify Ringer deal that they did,
right? It's huge.
It kind of felt like an opportunity for us to take the pod to the next level and grow it even more with a place that really had established success with growing podcasts. I think, one of the unfortunate parts you talk about, like taking an audience with you, is because we've been so nomadic, it has in some ways, forced a lot of work from our audience. We built up a nice following when we were at Players Tribune, then we left for Uninterrupted. We built up a really nice subscriber base at Uninterrupted. We weren't able to secure the RSS feed, which was Uninterrupted's right. When we went to the Ringer, we lose, 5 digits worth of subscribers. Now we got to build them back up at the Ringer. There's sort of that, like, is it going to be Spotify, or are you going to be like, no, you can subscribe wherever. So I think that's the only tough part, is trying to find that, not lose, listeners in the shuffle, because we've made it hard on them. Gratefully, I feel like many of them have stayed, and this Judge episode is a great example of that. And I think one of the coolest things for CC and me is, obviously CC and I both do other things. CC's main job, as we all know, is being a Hall of Fame pitcher, right? For me, my main gig is being a play-by-play broadcaster for ESPN and the S Network. But when I meet people, I would say 70% of the time, the first thing they bring up is R2C2.
Isn't that incredible? Holy crap.
And CC has the same experience, which is amazing, given the breadth of his career. Yeah. So, I think we find great satisfaction in that, and in knowing that, regardless of how we bounced around, people have stuck with it and really like to listen.
It's interesting to see how, we see the professional Ryan Ruocco on TV all the time. And I'm not in any way saying you're less professional, but you kind of let your hair down and be yourself, and that's such a great, that is so important in podcasting now, because we want to see the real CC. We see the CC, he's got everybody's back. He'll throw at anybody, he's that guy. And we want to see more of that on the pod. And we're seeing it where he's talking, he's talking back about Chris Russo and his opinions, being the stupid old school, baseball guy, or his passion about Ohtani, and you being able to joke around a lot, which I love. And I think that's why your podcast is so successful. And all these great guests come on. The guest list is long and amazing, but there's one guy that you had on was your boss, Bill Simmons. What is the relationship like with Simmons being a Boston guy and you two guys being New York guys?
Man, I think that makes for playful content when we talk, Boston, New York sports. I have so much respect for Bill. I think if you look at what Bill has done in sports media, crazy. He's had a one-of-one career. If you think about the place in sports media that he's carved out for himself, he literally blazed his own path, and has had just remarkable success every step of the way. And so for me, I feel grateful to have been able to develop a little bit of a relationship with Bill, and then also to learn from Bill as well. And I appreciate his wisdom, and the way he sees things, and he's someone I always enjoyed. I was a fan of his work. I always admired him, and so to get to work for him in some sense has been a really big thrill for me in my career.
Do you guys see that the Ringer maybe gives a little bit more creative freedom with your podcast than maybe Players Tribune and Uninterrupted? Because the Ringer has a wide range of podcasts, sports, The Bachelor, Succession, whatever it is.
But I actually, no, I think that I think we've had a lot of creative freedom wherever we've gone.
That's
I would
great.
say if anything, we get more feedback at the Ringer than we have at the previous two places. And I think that's because Bill has incredible credentials and he's, very involved and aware. So I find it valuable. But I think that we've had, in general, creative freedom wherever we've been because, people are enticed to us because of what we already have. And I also think there is an element of like, CC's, he's doing this the way he wants to do it, right? Like he's going to be open to suggestions and ideas, but if you come in and micromanage him, he's going to be like, I don't need to do this, like,
right.
and
right.
and me to a lesser degree, I don't have the same money in the bank that CC does, but it's still not my main thing, right? Like I love it, and I think CC and I will do it forever. But I think if someone came in and was like, don't talk about this, do talk about this, don't talk about this, I think we'd be like, no, like we're good. We don't need to be doing this. Like I think we both have the same ideas about what we want. When we had our initial conversation about the pod and how we wanted to start it, why we wanted to start it in spring training of 2017, it was about like I never wanted to go back to a place of feeling like a talk show host, which I did, early on in my career at ESPN Radio in New York, because I felt like, there's just a certain culture of making mountains out of molehills. And I just didn't want to do that as somebody whose primary responsibility is a play-by-play broadcaster. I just didn't feel comfortable doing it. And I kind of got sucked into it, like that mode of doing things. And I kind of got to a place where I was like, if I ever do anything in hosting again, like I want it to be more personality driven, like story based, like getting to know guests, like, and CC had the same ideas. And so I think we kind of both like, yeah, we give our opinions about things, but I don't think we ever give them to get a reaction. We give our opinions because we have something to say, like to your point about letting my hair down, like I can go into more depth on my podcast about why I think it's ridiculous Kyrie Irving isn't allowed to play at Barclays Center right now, right? Than I can in a game broadcast. Like I can just go into it more.
But you can't give your opinion, like your real, like passionate. I feel like you have to hold back a little bit professionally, but that's what's beautiful about podcasting.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. If I was on a game, I'm not going to be able to go all in on that. But on the podcast, I can. Now, I'm not doing that for any kind of reaction. I'm doing it because I have a platform and I'm educated on the issues and I feel comfortable articulating my educated point of view on it. Right.
Exactly.
But I don't ever feel like if somebody is like, oh, who's going to win the NCAA tournament? Like you need to talk about this on air. I don't feel as compelled to, like, I feel very comfortable being like, honestly, I have no idea. I don't watch it. I don't watch enough men's college basketball to have an informed opinion, But so I feel like it's a good balance where, there are times CC and I have very opinionated things to say on the podcast, but it's totally organic. And there's nothing about the format that makes us feel compelled to go there unless we want to go there. Instead, what it's really about is, having fun with the sports we love and getting to know figures in the sports. And we think we're able to do that better on R2C2 than other places because there's a level of comfort our guests feel because of, I think first and foremost, CC's credentials, his welcoming demeanor, his amazing personality, and then also I think the dynamic CC and I have kind of helps people let their guard down as well.
And that's what people come to the podcast for, is to get the real opinions that they're looking for. They can go on freaking ESPN or wherever to listen to a talking head, but if they want to listen to someone talk about a specific sport or a specific topic that everyone knows everything about, they'll come to you. And my last question when it comes to the guests and stuff like that, is there a guest you guys are looking for right now that is your white whale, that the fans know that you want it and they want it too? Is there somebody that's on that list?
I mean, Eminem is my ultimate. I really
why Eminem?
He's my favorite musician of all time, and CC is neighbors with his manager Paul Rosenberg. So that's my that's my challenge for Steve.
Okay.
My challenge for him is to get Eminem. I don't know how realistic that is. But I or someday getting Jordan on because CC's a Jordan Brand guy. He's friends with MJ, so that would be amazing. but in the, I think somebody we're working on right now that we'd love to get on is Adam Silver. I know that's one we're working on,
That's
trying to
huge.
get on soon. We'll see if it happens. He's a busy guy, so if he can't, certainly will not hold it against him. He's an amazing man, and we would love it if it happens. We were working on doing a spring training trip and getting a few big names at spring training. It's on hold a little bit just because of the lockout. But I think I think that we within baseball, one that like we've almost gotten a couple times that we want to make happen is Mike Trout. I know he's had interest. We've had interest and we just haven't been able to make it work yet. I think there's I think it'd be really interesting at some point for us to do one with Cashman. We haven't, but I think it could be super interesting.
Talk about how the relationship of how CC got persuaded to come to New York. And I didn't know CC was one goal was to be a Dodger. I never knew that until the other day when you guys were interviewing Judge and he said, yeah, when I become a free agent, I want to be in LA. I was looking at homes. I was like, what? I thought it was New York all the way. See, that's the shit people like to hear. That's the shit people. And personally, for a guest, I correct me if I'm wrong. I did my research, but if I'm wrong, let me know. A-Rod is my favorite player of all time. I wore 13 in college. I played college ball at Purchase. Batting stance was identical for me. If I had a guess for you guys to get is Rodriguez. If that's
so when we were at Players Tribune, we did have Alex on, and
he was. Yeah,
he was. Right. And it was our first year, and he was amazing. We're due to have him back on for sure. I'm friends with Alex. CC's friends with Alex. We both love him. So I would love to get Alex back on, especially he's always got incredible things going on in his life. So would love that. Would love to get him back on at some point.
Okay, I want to get into the nitty gritty of some New York sports, and then we'll wrap up here. You had Judge on your podcast. It was their latest episode. You talked about, you guys went in detail that he's going to be a free agent next season. And, New Yorkers are wondering, is Cashman the Yankees going to re-sign him? Will he become an unrestricted free agent and get a gigantic contract? Is he worth the money? Your opinion, will the Yankees sign him long-term at the age of 29?
Yeah, I have no insider knowledge. Let me say that, because sometimes we can get ourselves in trouble because people just assume we do. I don't have any, I'm not just being coy. I don't have any insider knowledge as to whether, there are negotiations going on or they will be, or there have been or whatever. But I do think ultimately, whether it happens before the season or after the season, he'll stay. I think that, Brian Cashman's even said he's a special case, and
right.
I think that, he said that in reference to the idea of signing him before his contract expires, which is usually something the Yankees don't like to do. But, I think that he's not just an incredibly impactful all-star MVP caliber player. He's also the kind of face of the franchise and leader you want if you're the New York Yankees, and the guys who have that level of talent and also have that level of commitment and appreciation for the franchise and carry themselves with the class that Judge does, they don't grow on trees, and they're a very rare breed. They're a very rare breed. So I think Judge clearly wants to stay a Yankee. He'll do whatever he has to do business-wise ultimately, but he clearly wants to stay. And I think there's a lot of reasons beyond just the way Aaron impacts wins and losses, which is reason enough. But I think there's a lot of reasons even beyond that to think something gets done.
Is he worth a 8-year deal? Because, for me as a outside perspective and as a person in the media myself and a giant Yankee fan, he's worth the money. But is he worth a 8 to 10-year contract? I don't think he is, strictly for the fact of injuries. There's absolutely zero reason to doubt that he can't perform. This past season, he went off, MVP candidate in his own right. But I would maybe give him a 6-year deal, maybe at most a 7-year with an option, maybe. But if you had the option as Brian Cashman, what would you do? If you can give your opinion on that.
I would. I think that you have to look at those later years as a tax for what you're paying for in the early years, you know?
I say that all the time.
Yeah. Like, so, I mean, we could say like, hey, I feel much more comfortable giving Aaron Judge a 6-year deal than I do an 8-year deal. Well, of course you do. Like you would with any athlete who's going to be, you know, 30 to 36 in those years, right? Than you would age 37 and 38. But the reality is someone's going to give him that, you know, because they want his ages 30 to 34 in their uniform. Right. So if that's what it may, you know, sometimes because of the security, guys will take 1 less year or 2 less years to lock it up before they get to free agency. So, you know, if the Yankees came with, you know, a per annum that really entices Aaron and it was only 6 years, well, maybe he would take that. I don't know. But I and that obviously would be a great, you know, scenario for the Yankees. But if keeping him means tacking on a year or two where you're like, he may not be quite as productive, do I think that's worth it? I do. I do think it's worth it because I think that what you're getting from him in the front end of the deal is worth whatever tax you're going to pay on the back end.
I wanted to ask a quick question about the MLB lockout, and then we'll get into this James Harden trade, which you are directly involved with the Nets all the time. But the lockout, you and I and millions of other fans and people in the media are frustrated. We are tired of this BS back and forth affair. This whole week, they're meeting every day. How many games are we losing this year, on your opinion? And how bad is this going to be for baseball going forward in the future? Because to me, I think all the fans we gained last year, you're losing a bunch this year.
Well, I think that it depends. I don't think you're going to lose any if you miss spring training games. I think you're going to lose some if you miss regular season games. And I think that the way I felt all along is, you know, more important than what each side wants individually. I think they both need to have an understanding that collectively they can't miss regular season games. No. I'm sorry, but for us to have to get pom-poms out about, yay, the season's back on May 1st, that's maybe I'm going to be forced into doing that in some sense because of my jobs, but like it's going to feel it's going to feel gross. It's going to feel gross.
Yeah, I can't blame you.
Because here's the thing. 2 years ago, we had a completely altered season because of reasons outside of the control of baseball.
Yeah, can't do anything about it.
Right. Can't do anything about 2020. Okay, maybe you could have 70 games to 60, whatever. You couldn't do anything about it. It is what it is, right? Then last year, your season was still altered some because for half the year, you had many ballparks that weren't at full capacity, right? Like you still had different things that made it not a real season. Let's not forget when the Astros came to Yankee Stadium in May, it was only 10,000 fans, even if it sounded like 50, right? So it wasn't a full real season last year, even though at the end of the year it started to feel that way. It wasn't. Yeah. This year, there is nothing but self-inflicted wounds to keep you from having your first normal baseball season in 3 years. To not figure out a creative solution to get that done is an absolute crime. And I don't care. I don't care what the players want or what the owners want. I don't care because your job is to be able to communicate it in a way that comes up with a palatable solution. And I don't care if this guy's an idiot or this guy's dense or this guy's, you know, too stubborn. Your job is to find a way to get that person to understand. That's your job, negotiating. If you don't do that job, you're failing, whether you're up on the player side or you're on the league side. And so I have no sympathy. I don't care. I don't care if the players think they're right. I don't care if the owners think they're right. I don't care who's right. There's only one thing that's right, and it's coming up with a solution that does not miss a single regular season game. And anything other than that, I think will be a failure that has consequences that extend far beyond what either side seems to realize right now. Maybe they do realize it. I hope they do. But I don't know if it's fully appreciated in the conversation that there's nothing individually either side can gain, to me, that's more important than the season starting on time for the collective health of the sport.
Mic drop. Ryan Ruocco, mic drop. Dude, you were spot on. I totally agree. If you lose spring training games, whatever. That's not really for the fans. It's really for the guys to get ready. And if they're not practicing on their own right now, then there's a problem within its own. But if we lose games till May, of course we're losing millions of dollars, which is not the real important thing. The important thing is the fan base is this small already. You're going to make it this small, and trying to compete with the NBA and the NFL has always been a problem, and it will always be a problem. But this doesn't help. And with the emergence of like Ohtani last year and guys who had ridiculous seasons with, you know, you have all this hard work that they put in. So, and with social media wise, they did a great job last year too. And then you put all on the back burner. We can go on forever about this, but I do want to end with the James Harden trade. Harden and the Nets, a wishy-washy, awkward relationship over the last year and a half. He goes over to the 76ers with Paul Millsaps, and the Nets get Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and 2 first-round selections. Who won the trade? I think, for me, I think the Nets won the long term with depth with Seth Curry and Andre Drummond and whatever Simmons comes back. But who do you think won the trade?
I don't think you ever know until things play out. You know, I think that you can easily make a case for either team. I think both teams are improved. You know, the 76ers didn't have Ben Simmons on the floor. You know, he was a literal zero for them this season. They're getting James Harden. Would you trade Seth Curry and Andre Drummond for the play of James Harden? Of course you would. So that's a big win for Philadelphia as far as this team goes this year. For the Nets, you know, one thing that was very clear, especially after the injury to Joe Harris and Kyrie's, you know, current part-time playing status, although hopefully that changes. And then, some other guys in and out of the lineup, but especially those two, is they needed more depth. You know, like they needed another shooter badly. And I think they also needed some length, some athleticism, some youth, some versatility. And so this trade served a lot of purposes for them. Plus, I think Ben Simmons is going to thrive around KD and Kyrie, in addition to the other Nets, shooters and who they have. So I think there's a lot to like for each team in this deal. I think you do it 10 out of 10 times if you're the Nets. I think you do it 10 out of 10 times if you're the Sixers. And I hope we get to see those teams meet in the playoffs. You know, James Harden last year seemed like a perfect fit in Brooklyn. When they, were playing without Kyrie or playing without KD, he just kept leading them to wins. He was unbelievable. I can't tell you how many times Steve Nash told us, both publicly and privately, just how great James Harden was in the room, what a leader he was. Like, he seemed to be one of the future cornerstones of the franchise. But this year's, it was just different. I think, we only saw the best version of him in spurts. And he didn't also have Kyrie there for huge chunks of time. And so, I think it was clear that it was time to move on for both parties. And I think, given that, I think the Nets did about as well as you could have hoped for when you have to trade a guy like James Harden.
Let's just hope we see this next big three for more than 16 games, because I feel like we lost out on something great with Harden, Kyrie, and KD. The talent there, only 16 games on the floor together, was a shame. But Ryan, I appreciate you coming on. Plug the podcast, your socials, whatever it is. This is your time. You're on the floor.
Hey, thanks, man. Yeah, you guys definitely follow our new YouTube page for R2C2. It's just R2C2 on YouTube. My Twitter is at Ryan Ruocco. My Instagram's at Ryrukes, Ryrukes. And keep tuning into Nets on Yes, and to make sure to check out the women's NCAA tournament. I'll be doing that this year for the second straight year. It's as fun as any event I've ever had, and so that obviously will be in March and then the first weekend in April on ESPN and ABC. So make sure to check that out.
Ryan, feel better, and appreciate you coming on.
Thanks a lot, Taylor. Appreciate you, man.